This brand has created more than 1,300 unique movements, and those movements were used by the likes of Patek Philippe, Vacheron Constantin, and Audemars Piguet. This is one of the few Swiss brands still producing its own movements, cases, dials, hands, and bracelets almost across the board. This is a brand with a watch that rivals the Cartier Tank and the Patek Philippe Calatrava. This is a brand that invented a clock powered not by winding, but by subtle changes in air temperature. Philippe Dufour worked here, Mats Buser worked here, and yet this is a brand that is consistently overlooked in watch media and in the watch market. If there's one criminally underrated watch brand in the world today, it's JLC. For a quick wrist check, I'll show you one from my personal collection. This is a LeCoultre Powermatic. This is a piece from the early 1950s, and it's the first automatic wristwatch featuring a power reserve indicator. It's so cool to see the machine power up as you turn the crown and to feel the bumper movement bounce back and forth as you move your wrist. When I was applying to my first job in watch media, I actually wrote a test article about the history of the LeCoultre sub-brand, which is essentially the American wing of the company at that time. So this piece, this LeCoultre Powermatic, is pivotal to my collecting journey and really my life as a whole. And so the central question for today is, why is JLC overlooked and underrated? I mean, they make every kind of watch you can make, the watches themselves are exceptionally well built, and the brand heritage speaks for itself. Well, I think I figured out the reason why. Here it is. The ingredients are good, but the sauce doesn't hit. I'll say it again. The ingredients are good, but the sauce doesn't hit. Now, I've looked through the more than 7,000 JLC watches on Chrono24 to select the examples where the sauce really is smacking. Some of these you may recognize and some you will not. So if you like watches, but are tired of hearing about Rolex, Tudor, Patek, AP, etc., then let's change the narrative today and talk about one of the best kept secrets. By the way, you'll notice I keep referring to the brand as JLC. The brand themselves pronounces the full name as Jaeger-LeCoultre. Here's an example for reference. Jaeger-LeCoultre. But there are plenty of industry veterans who pronounce it Jaeger-LeCoultre because one of the two co-founders was named Edmund Jaeger, and that's not exactly a French name. Calling them JLC is perfectly acceptable, not to mention quicker and less pretentious. But if you do want to be pretentious, then by all means, say the full name and really dig into it. Jaeger-LeCoultre. For context, one of the reasons that the brand is often overlooked is that in 1932, JLC missed a huge business opportunity that would have drastically changed how we perceive them today. You'll hear about that at the end of the video, but first, let's go through JLC's major achievements and the models that correspond to those. Now, the LeCoultre part of the company dates all the way back to 1833, and they became the leading supplier of movements to the Swiss watch industry at the time. These range from chronographs to calendars to minute repeaters, and they set the world record for the thinnest pocket watch caliper at just 1.38 millimeters. Their client list included Patek Philippe, Audemars Piguet, Vacheron Constantin, Breguet, IWC, and more. In 1925, David LeCoultre, the grandson of the founder, merged his company with Edmund Jaeger, who is best known for making movements for Cartier. Not a bad origin story for JLC, right? Now, if you saw our watch talk with super collector Mitch Katz, you may remember the Reverso 101. This is a modern watch based around the Caliber 101, which debuted in 1929 and was famously worn by Queen Elizabeth during her coronation. This is the world's smallest mechanical movement and is hand engraved despite being about the size of a grain of rice. 1 year before that calendar debuted, we get the first Atmos clock in 1928. With most desk clocks, you need to wind them with a key, like how you'd wind your watch with a crown. But that's not how the Atmos works. These are powered by tiny changes in air temperature, and a difference of just 1 degree warmer or cooler is enough to power the clock for 2 days. Mark Newson even designed one. He's worked with Leica, Louis Vuitton, and you've probably seen his work with Apple. If you've got a few minutes, I'd recommend scrolling through the Atmos slots we have on the site now. Watches may come and go from your collection, but an Atmos is something you'll keep for a lifetime before passing down. There are also plenty of more affordable JLC desk slots with a huge range of designs. Now, 1931 was a huge year for JLC because that's when we get the Reverso. Legend has it that the watch was designed to help British officers based in India protect their watches during polo matches. This may or may not be 100% factually correct, but the case design set the Reverso apart from the competition, and it remains just as cool and tactile today as it did nearly 100 years ago. I want to hold on this model for a minute and create a brief tasting menu of the strongest iterations of this watch. The Classique is a classic for a reason, but it gets even better when you start to dig a bit. We'll get more complex as we go, but let's start simple with what are known as deco dials. You have versions in rose gold and white gold depending on your flavor preference. There are 4 different kinds of hour markers here, and that should not work, but somehow they all click into place. I like the tribute to 1931 for the same reason I like the black lacquer Santos. It's the kind of darker alter ego that changes the personality of the watch quite effectively, and there's a great balance between the hands and hour markers. The richness of this burgundy reverso cannot be denied, and there's a hidden detail that really grabs you when you slide the case. This is what we were talking about earlier when we say that the ingredients are good, and there are times when the sauce just hits. This is such a satisfying watch. You may be surprised to learn that JLC stopped producing the reverso from the late 1940s to the early 1970s. This watch, now known as the Corvo Reverso, is what brought them back. I won't say too much about this watch in this video because we have a watch talk where this features prominently. Not to sound like an infomercial, but some reversos give you 2 watches for the price of 1. If you type Duo Face into the search bar of Chrono24, you'll see just how far JLC has been able to stretch this concept. Perhaps the most popular versions of these allow you to track 2 different time zones for a rather elegant take on a GMT. Now, if you showed this Nets watch to someone at a party, watch lover or not, they'd be blown away. It's the Q3758420, and it features a triple calendar, a moon phase, guilloche dial, and a beautifully decorated movement. It's all relative, but this is a lot of watch for under 10K. This Nets watch is considerably more than 10K, but understandably so. The Reverso Tribute Chronograph caused a scene when it debuted in 2023, and it's a killer watch front to back. I've heard collectors complain that it's too hard to get, and I say good. The market is giving credit where credit is due, and JLC deserves its flowers for this watch. Jumping to 1958, we get a new and extremely rare watch called the Geophysic. These were anti-magnetic watches that were taken to the North Pole for use on the first submarine to sail beneath the polar ice caps. It was essentially JLC's version of the Milgauss, but with a more compelling backstory. JLC has made more modern reeditions of this watch, but the original was made for only 1 year, and there were only about 1,300 pieces produced during that time. As an anecdote, I've got a buddy who's a watch specialist at Sotheby's Auction House here in New York. He's handled more $1 million watches than nearly anyone on the planet, and one time he was telling me about some really top-tier collector that he met, and he grabbed me by the shoulders and he said, he had an original Geophysic. Now, it's tough to impress somebody like that, and yet JLC is still slept on as a whole. Starting in the 1950s and 60s, the brand becomes known for their underwater alarm watches, like the Memovats, the Polaris, and the Deep Sea Alarm. The vintage versions of these have a lot of charm. The Memovats alone has a wide range of dials to choose from, and references like the E855 are some of the most approachable ways to get into this category of vintage divers. There are also modern versions of each of these watches, and I think the Polaris offers a strong alternative to the Tudors and Omegas of the world. It's tough to decide between the classic black and the blue, but I think my personal favorite might be option C, which is this green dial variation that gets better the longer you look at it. Sticking with more contemporary options, you've got modern classics like the Master Control series, including dress watches, chronographs, world timers, and perpetual calendars. A crowd favorite has proven to be the 39mm Master Ultra Thin Moon. These are unimpeachably strong watches that do what they're designed to do and look good doing it. We could spend a whole video on their mega impressive watches like the Helio Tourbillon. If you're interested in this level of watchmaking, I highly encourage you to explore JLC contributions further. But for today, we'll focus on more readily attainable, not six-figure watches. Lastly, this one's out of chronological order, but if you're looking for a watch that's about to blow up on the vintage market, I've seen a handful of influential dealers start snatching up the Futurematic, particularly the porthole version. This is a watch with no crown sticking out for a truly symmetrical case profile, and the movement never fully runs out of power so that the watch springs back to life as soon as you put it on your wrist. Earlier in the video, I mentioned one huge missed opportunity for JLC that would have fundamentally altered the history of the company and would drastically change how we see them today. Now, back in 1932, JLC tried to buy a majority stake in a company called Patek Philippe. Their bid lost out to Charles and Jean Stern, who supplied dials to Patek at the time. Now, if you ever heard the term Stern Frere dial, that's who we're talking about. The Stern family is still in charge of Patek Philippe to this day, and it's safe to say that JLC's reputation and place in the market would be radically different had that deal gone through. You would have had, quote, the watchmakers, Jaeger-LeCoultre, stewarding what has long been known as the gold standard for high horology. Now, we can't change history, and because of that, JLC is, I would argue, the most underrated brand today. Now, you all have proven what an educated community this is, so I'd love to hear your take. We're all watch nerds, so let's nerd out. Do you think JLC is underrated? Yes or no? Why or why not? State your case in a comment. I'm Thomas Hendricks of Chrono 24. Thanks so much for watching this video. It's been so much fun, and we'll see you soon.